In the turbulent year 251 AD, when the Roman Empire seemed to be crumbling under the weight of barbarian invasions, virulent epidemics, and treacherous conspiracies, young Gaius Valens Hostilianus, barely 18 years old, was unwittingly plunged into a maelstrom of events that would forever alter his life. Son of the illustrious Decian dynasty, he appeared destined for a great future. Official history portrays him as a fleeting emperor, a minor figure whose life tragically ended at a young age due to plague. However, beneath this simplified and convenient narrative lies a far darker and more tragic truth. Hostilianus was not merely a young ruler thrust by fate into the epicenter of chaos. Above all, he was a victim of circumstance, an innocent boy whose purity was trampled within the opulent halls of the Palatine. He was a son whom treacherous court intrigues turned into a hostage of the very people sworn to protect him. He was an emperor silenced because his very existence threatened to expose terrible and unspeakable secrets. The Rome of the mid-3rd century was no longer the resplendent city that once embodied the grandeur of Augustus, nor the unyielding power it had been in the days of Trajan. It was a fading empire, torn apart by internal conflicts and civil wars, weakened by relentless epidemics, and steeped in the corruption of a ruling elite who seemed to prefer destroying lives rather than relinquishing their grasp on power. Within this tragic tableau, Hostilianus's life journey emerges as one of the most heartbreaking dramas that the passage of time has vainly sought to consign to oblivion. Today, the veil of secrecy will be torn away and the true story revealed. The tale to be heard recounts how the young emperor became a pawn in the hands of insidious forces, how he was manipulated and ultimately eliminated to protect the interests of those in power. It is a narrative rarely found in history textbooks, for it exposes the abyss of human cruelty capable of engulfing even those crowned with imperial power. If these opening lines already inspired dread, then the reader is yet to witness Rome's darkest countenance, one that official chronicles persistently attempted to bury in oblivion. Hostilianus was born around 230 AD in Rome, a city that no longer shone with its former splendor, but still desperately clung to its fading grandeur. He was the son of Emperor Decius, a military commander who had forged his path through the crucible of civil wars, and Herenia et Drusilla, a matron of aristocratic lineage. His destiny, at first glance, seemed predetermined to grow up in the shadow of his elder brother Herennius Etruscus, who was groomed as the legitimate heir to the throne. However, fate rarely aligns with the designs of mortals. In the summer of 251 AD, the Roman Empire faced a terrible calamity near Abritus, where Emperor Decius and his son Herennius perished in an ambush set by the Goths. The tragic demise of father and son, ruler and heir, plunged the capital into an abyss of chaos and a struggle for power. News of the event struck Rome like a thunderbolt. The city, accustomed to many tragedies, was stunned by the simultaneous loss of its leader and his successor. Amidst this chaos of fear and uncertainty, the name of Hostilianus, a modest youth of 20, suddenly resonated within political circles. Overnight, this young prince, reserved and inexperienced, became the sole legitimate representative of the dynasty. The Senate saw in him a vulnerable symbol of continuity, while military commanders viewed him as a tool to further their own ambitions. At this critical juncture, Trebonianus Gallus, a battle-hardened general who had survived the disaster at Abritus, emerged onto the political stage. Proclaimed emperor by the Danubian legions, Gallus sent a message to Rome, agreeing to rule jointly with Hostilianus, but on certain conditions. Hostilianus retained the title of emperor, yet was effectively to be under Gallus's tutelage, becoming his co-ruler, whose opinion would hold little sway in crucial decisions. Herennia Etrusilla, Hostilianus's mother, instantly grasped the gravity of her son's predicament. She understood that a young ruler, possessing neither political influence nor military experience, would become easy prey within the imperial palace, where intrigues were woven and treachery thrived. And though she felt powerless against the looming threat, it was clear that the wheels of power were already in motion, and Rome, as was known, forgave no weakness. Outwardly, it seemed Hostilianus had ascended to the pinnacle of power, occupying the throne of the world's greatest empire. In reality, however, he found himself in a gilded cage, where every gesture of benevolence concealed betrayal, and any counsel could turn into a death sentence. In the Palatine Palace, where marble walls had witnessed more secrets than all books combined, a man appeared who was destined to play a fateful role in Hostilianus's life, Marcus Flavius Secundus. This middle-aged man was renowned for his profound erudition in Greek philosophy and Latin rhetoric, but even more so for his astonishing ability to survive any political upheaval. He had served 4 different emperors, deftly adapting to each regime with the cunning of a snake shedding its skin. When Trebonianus Gallus proposed Secundus as a personal tutor for the young emperor, the court breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed a wise counselor would provide steadfast support for the inexperienced ruler. However, Herennia remained troubled. She detected something in Secundus that others chose to overlook: the cold, calculating gaze of a man who saw her son not as an emperor, but merely as prey. The cunning Secundus, masterful in rhetoric, convinced everyone of the necessity for private lessons for the young Caesar, to shield him from the inquisitive eyes of the court and ensure a profound understanding of power. Night after night, Hostilianus remained in his tutor's chambers, away from his mother and advisors, where conversations about philosophy and politics gradually escalated into something sinister. Secundus instilled the idea that absolute power demanded dominance and subjugation, quoting philosophers and emperors to justify the necessity of personal humiliations for the sake of state stability. Soon, however, words turned into practice, and Secundus began demanding proofs of obedience. The youth, consumed by fear and loneliness, endured what no ruler should have to suffer. Servants noticed changes. Hostilianus avoided eye contact, lost his appetite, and suffered from nightmares. His gaze, once naive, became distant, as if he sought refuge within his inner world. The court remained blind, content with official reports of the emperor's educational progress. No one suspected, or perhaps wished to suspect, that behind closed doors a tragedy was unfolding, one that would cast a shadow over the dynasty's history. August proved to be a harbinger of even more tragic events in the young emperor's fate. Under the hypocritical pretext of protecting him from the deadly plague sweeping Rome, Marcus Flavius Secundus subjected Hostilianus to complete alienation from the imperial court. Public appearances were reduced to nil. Even rare visits from his mother, Empress Herenia et Drusilla, were dry and formal, conducted under the vigilant supervision of guards and advisors. The youth, barely having felt the burden of imperial power, found himself utterly alone, like a prisoner in his own palace. Secundus convincingly presented isolation as a necessary condition for forging a strong ruler. But the truth was far grimmer. As night fell in the tutor's private chambers, manipulations far removed from educational purposes were carried out on the teenage emperor. The psychological impact was devastating. The young emperor lost his appetite, his voice trembled during official addresses, and attentive observers noted an absent gaze, as if his soul had departed his body. Servants whispered that they heard him talking to himself, or wakened in terror, crying out the names of his deceased father and brother. Suspicions began to stir in the Senate, but fear of a public scandal compelled the senators to remain silent. The empire, teetering on the brink, could not afford its ruler to appear before the people as a broken child. And what transpired behind the closed doors of Secundus's library remained a secret, hidden behind a wall of silent complicity. While Rome suffered from plague and military conflicts, a true fire raged in the very heart of the palace. The teenage emperor slowly sank into an abyss of fear, humiliation, and pain that no one wished to acknowledge. The tense silence shrouding the imperial court could not last indefinitely. Young Emperor Hostilianus's health deteriorated daily, becoming increasingly evident to those around him. During official events, his voice trembled betrayingly, his speeches sounded rehearsed and lifeless, and a grimace of pain, which he vainly tried to conceal, frequently appeared on his face. During a solemn procession dedicated to Rome's patron gods, a blatant incident occurred. Hostilianus suddenly collapsed to his knees before the astonished crowd, muttering incoherent words that many interpreted as a desperate plea for help. Some claim to have heard fragments of names, veiled accusations, and the youth's groans, no longer able to bear the heavy burden of the secret. Rumors of what was happening in the palace quickly reached the ears of the senators. Guards, in private conversations, admitted to hearing muffled screams and moans at night emanating from the chambers of Secundus, the emperor's tutor. Servants, meanwhile, recounted seeing the young ruler emerge from the rooms with torn clothes, marks of beatings on his body, and eyes red from weeping. Suspicions eventually reached Trebonianus Gallus, the co-ruler of the empire, who until then had chosen to turn a blind eye to events to avoid an unwelcome scandal. However, growing public unease compelled him to act. Under the pretext of discussing Hostilianus's educational progress, Gallus summoned Secundus to a secret meeting. In the gloom of his study, Gallus unequivocally expressed his concerns, directly questioning the methods the tutor employed in educating the young emperor. Secundus's reply was both artful and chilling. With a cold smile, he declared that the upbringing of an emperor demanded sacrifices beyond ordinary comprehension. According to him, power could not be grasped by intellect alone. The body and soul needed to endure trials beyond the capacity of a mere mortal. He added with venomous sarcasm that Hostilianus's fragility was a flaw that needed to be rectified at all costs, and if the young emperor could not withstand these trials, perhaps he was not meant to ascend the throne in the first place. Trebonianus Gallus faced a complex dilemma. threatening the stability of the entire Roman Empire. Exposing Marcus Flavius Secundus risked a colossal scandal, capable of plunging the state into an abyss of political chaos. However, by remaining silent, the emperor would become an accomplice to a terrible crime against the young Caesar, which was tantamount to sentencing him to death. Gallus chose the most unprincipled option, inaction, hoping to avoid immediate upheaval. Trebonianus Gallus's silence not only failed to resolve the problem, but exacerbated it. While the senior emperor attempted to maintain a facade of well-being, Marcus Flavius Secundus was already devising a new, insidious plan. Hostilianus gradually lost strength. His public fits, fainting spells, and incoherent speech aroused increasing suspicion. Palace rumors spread throughout Rome, reaching the ears of senators, and soon everyone began to surmise the sinister events unfolding within the palace. Secundus realized that the young emperor was no longer an asset, but had become a dangerous liability that needed to be eliminated. It was then that the most sinister intrigue emerged: death by plague. The epidemic, like a dark shadow, enveloped the empire, claiming thousands of lives. What could be a more fitting way to dispose of an undesirable ruler than to blame it all on disease? The plan was both simple and horrific. Poison, mimicking the symptoms of plague, was administered to Hostilianus in small doses via his wine and food. The emperor developed a fever, nausea, weakness, and delirium. Bribed or intimidated physicians confirmed the official diagnosis. No one suspected deception. As night enveloped Rome, Secundus continued his insidious lessons. He mercilessly exploited the young emperor's vulnerable state to break his will. In a sinister whisper, he instilled in him, "Your illness is no accident. It is divine retribution for your insignificance. Embrace death, knowing that even the gods deem you unworthy of the throne." The young ruler, barely past his 20th year, in rare moments of lucidity, realized he was being slowly but surely poisoned. To the few servants who retained a shred of courage, he whispered in desperation, "Death is in my cup. Every sip brings me closer to my end." But salvation was not to be found. The conspiracy was meticulously planned and executed. The Roman Empire stood on the brink of losing its last young emperor, not to the raging plague, but to the betrayal of those who should have protected him. Hostilianus's final days became a succession of agonizing torments. With each dawn, his strength waned, his body ravaged by an unceasing internal fever, and his mind fluctuated between clarity and delirium. Sinister rumors spread through the palace corridors. The young emperor was fading, and Rome, it seemed, remained indifferent to his fate. The official narrative spoke of plague, and no one dared publicly dispute it. However, in the secluded corners of the palace, servants whispered that something didn't add up in the story. Some claimed to have seen the youth recoil in horror from a cup of wine, begging not to be forced to drink it. Others swore that in his delirium he repeatedly uttered, "The poison is here within me." Herenia et Drusilla, the emperor's inconsolable mother, desperately tried to save her son. She summoned independent physicians, sought alternative treatments, and even tasted the food intended for Hostilianus herself. But all her efforts proved futile. The ruthless machinery of power proved stronger than a mother's instinct. Access to her son was severely restricted, warnings were ignored, and pleas drowned in a sinister silence steeped in fear. The 28th of July 251 AD marked a sorrowful date in Rome's history. The young emperor passed away, surrounded by court physicians and officials who hypocritically expressed their grief. The official cause of death was declared to be plague, but no one dared speak of poisoning, of abuses of power, or of the meticulously planned atrocity behind this demise. The funeral was lavish, befitting imperial grandeur. The populace mourned the untimely demise of a promising youth, while Trebonianus Gallus delivered pompous speeches, presenting Hostilianus as a victim of the epidemic. Marcus Flavius Secundus, the man who had ruined the innocent emperor, was present among the dignitaries in mourning attire, feigning grief, though not a single tear fell from his eyes. The official version stated, Hostilianus succumbed to the epidemic. The true cause of his death, however, was buried with his body, concealed by fear and corruption. Hostilianus's death brought no justice, only an ominous silence. The palace breathed a sigh of relief, seeing the young emperor buried under the guise of plague, and the conspirators could sleep soundly, knowing the sole witness to their atrocity had vanished. Rome once again preferred oblivion to truth. Marcus Flavius Secundus not only escaped punishment, but was handsomely rewarded. Thanks to his proximity to power, he became a trusted adviser, and his methods, though shrouded in darkness, were tolerated by the imperial machine. Thus, Hostilianus's tormentor continued to roam the marble halls, protected by the very system that had allowed the tragedy to unfold. Trebonianus Gallus, now sole emperor, consolidated his position as if nothing had happened. Official speeches spoke of stability, unity, and hope, but the reality was different. The empire continued to sink into an abyss of wars, epidemics, and intrigues, and the young emperor's blood remained an inconvenient secret within the walls of the Palatine. Herennia et Drusilla, Hostilianus's mother, gradually faded from public life. Her final years were filled with unceasing sorrow, powerlessness, and the pain of knowing she could not save her son. For her, Rome ceased to be the center of the world, transforming instead into her family's tomb. Hostilianus's name is barely mentioned in historical chronicles, reduced to a concise footnote, a young emperor who died of plague. Yet behind this sparse information lies a tragic tale of a young man whose life was broken by those sworn to protect him. He was an emperor silenced so that influential figures could maintain their grip on power. This story, consigned to oblivion for centuries, serves as a reminder that unchecked power can breed not only tyrants, but also innocent victims. And sometimes the most horrific manifestation of corruption lies not in lost battles, but in the atrocities committed under the guise of maintaining stability and order.